On the hot seat.
You violated the second rule I give to every witness. You answered more than I asked.
I adhered to the first one. I told the truth.
Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh faces tough questions from Democrats on abortion and gun control. We're inside the hearing room. Behind closed doors. We're in Rome with more details on Cardinal Donald Wuerl's conversation with Pope Francis. Religious persecution. A Syrian Catholic leader is calling for help, saying the government is trying to remove Christians and it's closing Catholic schools. And lending his voice. Today's papal audience wasn't all talk for the Holy Father. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 5th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh stresses judicial independence on the second day of his confirmation hearing. But as expected, the Catholic judge is put on the spot about hot-button issues like abortion, gun control, and presidential power. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us from the hearing. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Some Democrats fear Brett Kavanaugh could overturn Roe v. Wade. That's the landmark 1973 decision ensuring access to abortion across the country. Pro-abortion lawmakers want to know where Kavanaugh stands on the issue.
What would you say your position today is on a woman's right to choose?
As a judge, it is an important precedent of the Supreme Court. By it, I mean Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Been reaffirmed many times. Casey is precedent on precedent, which itself is an important factor to remember. And I understand the significance of the issue.
Democrats fear Brett Kavanaugh would be President Trump's man on the high court. But the 53-year-old nominee would not answer when asked if the president can be subpoenaed or could pardon himself. Judge Kavanaugh also described his service to the homeless with Catholic Charities.
I said I'm a Matthew 25, try to follow the lesson of serving the least fortunate among us. You know, when I was hungry, you gave me food, thirsty, you gave me drink, stranger, and you welcomed me, naked, and you clothed me, sick, and you cared for me, in prison, and you visited me.
Well, here he is with Monsignor John Ensler, the head of Catholic Charities in D.C., serving meals to the homeless. Ensler baptized the judge's two daughters, and he wrote senators a letter praising Kavanaugh. The senators also questioned Judge Kavanaugh about gun control, especially about banning assault weapons. Kavanaugh defended his own ruling protecting these semi-automatic guns, citing the precedent written by Justice Scalia, the Heller decision. Lauren?
Jason, tell me the breakdown of senators opposing and supporting Kavanaugh.
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham today cited the number of 11 senators who haven't publicly said if they'll vote yes or no. Really, we've got our eyes on about 5 senators, 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats. Republicans have a really slim majority, 51 to 49, and that's now that Senator John Kyle of Arizona today took the oath of office, replacing the late Senator John McCain. The 2 Republicans that we're really focusing on, Senators Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, both support abortion and are really the only 2 Republicans who could possibly vote against Kavanaugh.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, our eyes in that hearing room. Thank you, Jason. A pair of billboards along highways in Dallas issued different messages about life. Local media report one says abortion is self-care, and the other was placed about a month earlier. It says abortion is not health care, it hurts women and murders their babies. And that message was paid for by a pro-life pastor. President Trump is disputing his portrayal in an explosive new book from journalist Bob Woodward.
The book is total fiction. Just like he wrote in the past about other presidents, you look at what he said about President Bush, what he said about President Obama, big scandalous thing, it lasts for about a day.
The tell-all memoir, Fear, will be released next week. In it, Woodward says current and former White House aides call the president an idiot and a liar. President Trump's comments come after he welcomed the Emir of Kuwait to the White House for a wide-ranging conversation about many things, from trade to terrorism. The president says they're working hard to bring some stability to the Middle East. Kuwait worried about the nearby conflict in Yemen. The Emir wants the U.S. to help end that war. The Archdiocese of Chicago has removed 2 priests from ministry after they were charged with lewd conduct in Miami. Police reportedly found the 2 engaged in a sex act in a car. One of the priests is from Colombia and was involved in a program in Chicago for Hispanic seminarians. Pope Francis reminds the faithful to keep Holy Sunday the Lord's Day.
L'uomo non si è mai riposato tanto come oggi.
During his
Eppure,
weekly audience, Pope Francis said society is thirsty for entertainment and vacation. But the Holy Father says our souls find rest in God alone. The Pope did not address the sex abuse scandal or allegations that he knew about the misconduct of former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who is accused of abusing minors and seminarians. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliette, News Nightly has confirmed the Pope had a conversation with Cardinal Donald Wuerl, who is under fire for his handling of sex abuse cases as Bishop of Pittsburgh.
Well, in this conversation, the Pope reportedly told Cardinal Wuerl to discern the situation with his brother priests. And a source is telling News Nightly that Cardinal Wuerl will not preside over this year's Red Mass marking the start of the Supreme Court's new term. It's typically attended by several Supreme Court justices, Lauren, and the Cardinal typically does preside.
Next week, the Pope's closest advisors, known as the C9, fly in from around the world for a quarterly meeting. Tell us what they are saying about the Vigano allegations.
Well, that's right, Lauren. One member, Cardinal Oswald Gracious of Mumbai, India, he's actually come out in full support of the pontiff, saying that Vigano's testimony presents many gaps and that he and the Church in Asia are 100% on the side of the Pope. Now, he is the head of the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, and Gracious says he's grateful Pope Francis has chosen not to answer the former nuncio's accusations. Now, Cardinal Pietro Parolin here in Rome last week said that he was not worried by the situation and that the Pope wasn't either. Cardinal Sean O'Malley, the only American member of the C9, hasn't spoken out so far. However, more than 30 bishops across the United States are calling for a thorough investigation into the allegations, Lauren.
Give us a sampling of how other bishops around the world are reacting.
Well, as a matter of fact, it's not limited to the U.S. There are bishops and bishops' conferences internationally who are giving their opinions. And we've had bishops from Latin America saying that they are completely supportive of the Holy Father. For example, Cardinal Ruben Salazar of Bogota, Colombia, is calling the allegations an attack against the Pope's ministry and the Pope himself, and saying that that is shameful. On the other hand, Bishop John Keenan of Paisley, Scotland, says that the Vatican must authorize the opening of all relevant files and documents, and he's saying that Vigano's testimony is valuable and that it's, however, only one piece of the puzzle. Meanwhile, in Kazakhstan, Bishop Athanasius Schneider has released a list of reforms that are needed to purify the Church, Lauren.
Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Pakistan's new prime minister says he is optimistic relations between his country and the U.S. will improve. Imran Khan spoke after meeting with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Islamabad. The U.S. last week suspended $300 million of aid to the country, saying Pakistan is not doing enough to fight the Taliban and other Islamic militants. Britain has charged 2 Russians it says are behind the nerve agent poisoning of a former Moscow spy and his daughter on British soil. UK officials acknowledge there is little chance the Kremlin will hand over those 2 men. Russia strongly denies being involved in the attack. One of the top Catholic bishops in Syria is issuing an urgent call for help from the international community. He claims Kurdish authorities in the northeast are trying to drive out Christians from that region, and that includes shutting down private Catholic schools. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has response tonight from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. A State Department spokesperson tells me they have seen reports of Kurdish groups closing Catholic schools in Syria, but they tell me they cannot confirm if that's accurate. The U.S. goal in the country is to defeat ISIS, but even with ISIS now on the run, a Syrian Catholic leader says the faithful are still being pushed out. Despite a strong U.S.-led coalition in Syria working to eliminate ISIS and protect the rights of all Syrians, Christians continue to suffer. Archbishop Jacques Benon Hindo, a leader in the Syrian Catholic community, says the Kurdish government in Syria is closing Catholic schools in the northeast. He says the problem lies in 3 cities where Catholic schools have been educating children for more than 8 decades. The regional Kurdish authority is demanding the schools use the government's curriculum and textbooks. Archbishop Hindo tells the Catholic charity Aid to the Church in Need, quote, "They do not want us to instruct pupils in the liturgical language, Syriac, and they do not want us to teach history because they prefer to drum their own history into the heads of pupils." Edward Clancy is the head of outreach for the Catholic Aid Group.
It's troubling on many levels because the community there, the Christian community, is barely a shadow of what it used to be. And education is one of the hopeful opportunities for the continuation of the community.
Clancy says Christians in Syria and Iraq are often seen as outsiders, even among Kurdish groups who are working with the United States.
They're trying to destroy a culture or drive it out of the region.
The Archbishop is asking for prayer and action. He wants governments in the West to stand up for persecuted Christians in the region. Christian leaders and religious advocates are often persecuted for speaking out. Open Doors USA, a Christian advocacy group, estimates less than 900,000 Christians are left in Syria, and the numbers are still going down. In 2011, at the beginning of the Syrian civil war, the Christian population was more than 2 million. Lauren?
This is the same story we saw in Iraq. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Nearly 3,500 displaced people in South Sudan have been successfully relocated by the United Nations. It comes after fighting between various groups within the UN camp over the past few weeks that threatened vulnerable civilians inside. Now water is being installed and a health clinic is up and running. One organizer says the ultimate goal is to return the displaced to their own villages. Typhoon Jebi kills at least 11 people and injures nearly 470 yesterday in Japan. Jebi is the strongest typhoon to hit Japan in 25 years. More than 500,000 households in Osaka remain without power. The closure of Japan's main airport has triggered concern about the possible impact on tourism and the economy. We have much more on our show this evening. We're going to be talking about Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation from a Catholic perspective, and the president of a Catholic university is amending statements he made about allegations against Pope Francis. Welcome back to the program. A statue of the Virgin Mary in New Mexico is reportedly crying again. The Hobbs News Sun reports the bronze sculpture was seen shedding tears this weekend for the first time in more than 3 months. The Diocese of Las Cruces is investigating. Our next guest calls the confirmation hearing yesterday for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh a display of mob rule by Democrats. Judicial Crisis Network's Carrie Severino says, quote, Judge Kavanaugh is a highly qualified nominee and a mainstream judge who follows the law and adheres to the Constitution, and that's why Democrats are so frustrated and hysterical. Carrie Severino from Judicial Crisis Network joins us now. Carrie, welcome back to the program.
Great to be here.
These proceedings are very partisan. Rhode Island Democrat Sheldon Whitehouse specifically mentioned ads run by your group in favor of Judge Kavanaugh as an example of the influence of big money in this confirmation process. Your response?
Well, look, there's groups like Planned Parenthood on the other side who started running ads against this nominee starting the first day of his hearings. Our organization's mission is to be out there to defend judges who are in favor of the Constitution and the laws as they are written. And so we are out there to combat that misinformation about Judge Kavanaugh and make sure people understand his real record on the bench.
Should there be more transparency in terms of who's funding these ads?
Well, our group, like groups like Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, the NAACP, we protect the confidentiality of our donors. And it's obvious to see why when you see some of the attacks that get launched, particularly against people on the conservative side of the bench. But we also think that the most important thing here is really the judge's record, and that's what we should be debating. So I think that'll speak for itself.
Let's take a look at his record and talk a little bit about the hearing. Judge Kavanaugh says his personal beliefs are not relevant. Senator Dianne Feinstein this morning asked if Roe versus Wade was correct law and if he would try to overturn it. He answered by saying it is settled law. How are his answers on abortion being perceived?
Well, you have to take his answers in the context of how judges, according to ethical rules, are allowed to comment on cases. And they have to be very careful not to forecast what they would do in a case that's not before them, but that's likely to come before them. They can't preview how they think they would rule, or they'd have to recuse themselves from the case. That's the standard that all the sitting members of the Supreme Court applied during their confirmation hearings, and that's the standard Judge Kavanaugh has applied. So he can mention, yes, this is a case, yes, it's been standing for 40-some years now, but he can't give us a view, as much as many people want to hear it, of what he would do if it came back before the court.
He also didn't address whether a president can be forced to testify in a criminal case, calling it a hypothetical. Was that a fair question in light of the Mueller investigation? And why not answer the question again if, as he says, no one is above the law?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think his record shows clearly that he does not believe anyone's above the law. When you look at his tenure on the court immediately following being appointed by President Bush, he had 2.5 more years of the Bush administration, during which he overturned Bush regulations and went against the Bush administration position in 8 different cases. So he doesn't believe anyone's above the law, but precisely because it's an issue that is very likely to be litigated in the lower courts, if in possibly make it to the Supreme Court, he simply can't comment on it. So I know it's frustrating for people on the outside, but if you look at his record, that is what really we can see, okay, how has he behaved with these cases in the past? And you can see he's someone who takes very seriously the idea of setting politics aside and looking at where the law and the Constitution leads you, whether that leads you, in favor of or opposed to the president that appoints you.
Let's go back to the circus. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said that within the first hour and 18 minutes after Judge Kavanaugh's nominations, Democrats decried it. What will it take to restore this process to a review of these judicial qualifications rather than political theater?
Yeah, it has been theater. During the first hour, 44 different times, Senate Democrats interrupted Senator Grassley. He was not even able to start his opening statements or finish his first sentence for an hour practically. And there were 70 people arrested. Every few minutes they stand up in the back, they shout something, keep your hands off my body or something, and then they get dragged out. It's unfortunate because we have a First Amendment so we can have reasoned debate about these things. And also when you have a Senate trying to conduct hearings, I think there needs to be some respect of the process. What's discouraging to me, too, is seeing that the Senate Democrats have not only not criticized that with a couple rare exceptions, but have actually been encouraging that in many cases. I hope that we can get back to talking about the nominee because they really have recognized his record is so stellar. It's so widely respected by litigators, by academics across the legal spectrum. They'd rather talk about other topics, including people shouting in the background, than having Judge Kavanaugh really on display.
Carrie Severino, Chief Counsel and Policy Director for Judicial Crisis Network. Thanks for joining us, Carrie.
Great to be here.
The president of a Catholic university is amending his statement denouncing conservative critics of Pope Francis. On our show last week, Jim Toohey said it was wrong to call on the Holy Father to step down.
I think those that are announcing as conservatives their desire for the Pope to step down have to think through the principle of that in terms of the papacy. We don't like it when people are airing dissent about John Paul II, about Pope Benedict XVI. And so I think we have to be careful when we go after this Pope.
Toohey later released a statement on the school's website saying in part, quote, "People are entitled to their views on Pope Francis and his pontificate. My concern is with how we express our views and act upon them during this dark controversy." He also apologized for criticizing Cardinal Raymond Burke in his initial statement. Coming up next on EWTN News Nightly, an analysis on whether Twitter and its CEO Jack Dorsey are targeting conservatives. Plus, Pope Francis raises his voice in song. And welcome back to the program. A Catholic church in the Czech Republic is creating a lot of buzz after an art student filled it with ghostly figures. The 14th century church was restored last year with help from visitor donations. Each April, a special mass is held there to celebrate the church's namesake, St. George. 2 hearings on Capitol Hill today focused on social media. In the morning, executives from Twitter and Facebook said they're trying to root out foreign interests, seeking to manipulate voters as midterm elections draw closer. In the afternoon, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey addressed claims the platform is biased against conservatives. Joining me now is Kalev Litaru, Senior Fellow at Real Clear Politics. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. In today's hearing, Jack Dorsey, Twitter CEO, insisted the company does not operate under a political ideology. Let's take a listen to what he said.
I want to start by making something very clear. We don't consider political viewpoints, perspectives, or party affiliation in any of our policies or enforcement decisions.
Is that
period?
Is that true? Does the data support it?
You know, this is a great question. We actually don't have that data to answer those questions. The companies keep saying, you know, trust us, whereas there's absolutely no bias. We have our rules that say there's no bias, so there can't be bias. Well, you know, I'm someone who works with data for a living. So my answer to that is, well, give me the data. You know, let's actually see. When you say that Democrats are no more likely to have issues in the platform than Republicans, well, you know, give us some example of that. Let's actually have those numbers.
And we've never seen them?
We've never seen them. I mean, today, for the first time, he mentioned actually a few numbers about views, you know, how many views Republican, I think, lawmakers get versus Democratic lawmakers. But really, the question isn't about lawmakers as much. I mean, that has been an issue, but it's more about everyday people. So someone, for example,
Sure.
that posts something.
Post something, as in the
Exactly.
Meghan McCain picture. Explain
exactly.
that.
Well, the Meghan McCain's an interesting one. So I had actually asked Twitter when that happened. I said, look, you know, 100+ people allegedly have reported this, and nothing happened.
So let's explain what it was. It was a picture of Meghan McCain. A gun was pointing at her. And this was after her father's funeral, or during the whole period, right?
Yeah, so, you know, this photograph, this Photoshop photograph was put out there. Her husband, apparently up to 100 different people, all reported this to Twitter, and the photo just was left up. Nothing happened. And that really raises the question. Now, some have said, well, does this mean that there's bias? You know, I think, and actually, Dorsey actually addressed this afternoon and said, well, you know, we should have done this faster. This is more of an algorithmic failure. I think really the question really comes down to they just don't have enough staff to moderate this. And in fact, I had actually asked them I'd actually said, you know, what does this actually reflect? And the answer was, well, we're not going to comment on that. And I think really it just comes down to the companies want to enforce a single set of rules for the entire planet, but that requires a lot of people, a lot of tools.
It's impossible to do. Should tech companies be regulated?
You know, in Germany, you know, Facebook kept saying, look, we can't fight hate speech. There's absolutely nothing we can do. You know, Germany passes some laws, threatens some others, and almost overnight, Facebook hires a ton of new people. They add all these new capabilities. And, you know, they say, look at all the amazing things we can do about it. So I think really, when given proper motivation, companies can do amazing things.
Pressure, media pressure, anyone? From a political perspective, Donald Trump says, and he tweeted this out on August 28th, Google search results for Trump news show only viewing, reporting, or fake news media. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others. Is this anti-tech company sentiment an effective tactic to galvanize voters?
You know, I think really, you know, these are companies that have really lost trust. They keep saying, trust us, but they've lost trust in so many different ways. I think it's actually a superb, you know, whether it's true or not, I think it's a superb issue for him to raise because the companies are stonewalling. They're not giving us any reason to trust them. And I think certainly there is some truth to that, I think. I don't think it's that they're focusing on conservatives. I think that they are potentially, their algorithms, their processes may be implicitly biased toward
conservatives.
Against conservative speech in some ways.
Against conservatives.
And I think, you know, I do not think that either Facebook or Twitter or any of the companies, I don't think that they're sitting there saying, let's get rid of conservatives. I think really what's coming down to is, you know, over time, when you have humans either directly deleting things or training computers to do that, I think they learn things, and they may learn some inadvertent things. And whether maybe conservatives engage in certain behaviors, as Twitter claims, that causes them to be banned more often, we simply don't know because they refuse to tell us what those signals are, and if they're applying those to everyone. More likely, I think it's just that these things have become so complex we just don't understand anymore, and they really, we need to have that data.
Thank you so much. Not to mention the midterms are coming up and Russian interference. I mean, it's a big problem.
Well, the fact that Twitter said, look, we could ban the president, that's a really scary thought.
Kala Vlitaru, Senior Fellow at Real Clear Politics. Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, tonight, the Holy Father joins pilgrims for an impromptu performance in St. Peter's Square. While greeting visitors after his weekly talk, Pope Francis sang with a group from Monterrey, Mexico. Their song celebrates Our Lady of Guadalupe, the patron of the Americas. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn, EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.